shadows of silent pines again. They said the pines remember. And when Mara drove past the crooked church sign that read Silent Pines, she felt the memory press the back of her eyes like someone breathing behind glass. The town had not changed much. A bakery with a single neon loaf, the library with its sagging brick, and her aunt's house folded into the trees like a held breath. She had come to close an estate, to sort papers. Instead, the house opened its mouth of shadow as if to say it had been waiting. Inside, the air smelled of dust and lemon oil, things that had been cared for out of habit rather than warmth. The parlor was filled with furniture in careful rows, as if guests might be expected and never arrive. On the mantel sat a tape recorder, its leather case cracked, a single cassette wedged like a forgotten tooth. A pewter music box kept the end of its ribbon in the corner, silent, but for the small dent on its lid, the music waiting like a promise. When Mara pressed play, the machine offered only a thin hiss, then her aunt's voice, not an immediate greeting, but a list of small domestic things, naming cupboards and curtains with strange tenderness. Between those lines, there was a cadence, a rhythm that made the hairs on Mara's arms bristle, a low syllable repeated that could have been a name, or a sound her ears wanted to turn into meaning. She rewound, suspicious she'd missed context, and felt suddenly like someone who'd stepped into a sentence she didn't know how to finish. Under a pew, the key waited, brass dulled by time and use, tucked beneath an old hymn book as if someone had placed it there to be found slowly. The key carried a faint smell of cedar and something else she couldn't name till she opened the hymn book and a folded photo fell out. An old family portrait in which every person's eyes were caught by a light that did not belong to the camera. One face, toward the back, had been smudged so the light erased the features entirely. Neighbors were helpful in an easy way, the kind of help that keeps distance. Jonah, who lived 2 doors down and whose voice was paper soft, arranged for the funeral plate and recommended a carpenter for the attic hatch. He told small stories about her aunt, a woman who kept lists of lists, who would iron shopping lists until they lay like skin. Jonah's mouth made shapes around his words that suggested he believed there were things best not said out loud in silent pines. That night, the house learned to make new noises. A tapping started at 3 in the morning, patient, irregular, as if someone behind a wall was trying different fingers. Mara told herself it was settling wood or mice. She told herself that until the tapping answered her faintly when she whispered into the dark. She recorded the sound out of a stubborn need to prove she was not becoming unreliable. Playback gave nothing but the same hiss as before, until the tape slowed, and the hiss arranged itself into syllables almost like breath. In the morning, small things had moved. The kitchen chairs were marginally closer to the table. The music box sat open when she could have sworn she had closed it, and the photograph lay face down on the hall runner. The house's corrections were never dramatic. They were the kind of tiny alterations that force you to doubt the continuity of your own life. Mara began to map events on a legal pad. Times, noises, objects shifted. The mapping felt like a defense, an attempt to translate the house's behavior into a bureaucratic language she understood. She replayed the tapes more than she slept. Between the lines of domestic inventory, her aunt had recorded there was sometimes a phrase, patient and repeating. "Come back," the recorder seemed to say, or a syllable that put a knot in the base of her throat. The voice wasn't pleading. It was almost instructional, as if arranging the pieces of some mechanism whose design she had never been taught. The notion that someone could be left in a house, like a note, unsettled her more than fear of a person ever could. When she asked Jonah about the attic, his eyes moved toward the pines, and he said, quiet as a chord, that some places keep whatever is laid in them. He admitted the town muttered about the house. Children's dares used to aim for its porch, as if braving a story. His hands lingered on the fence rail, knuckles white. "It isn't dangerous," he said, and because his voice shook, she heard a warning cloaked as reassurance. The pines outside rattled like someone reading along in the margins. Midnight became a clearer hour. The house's personality altered with the low moon. Mara took to setting the music box on the table and winding it until its lullaby jittered like a small creature. Once, while it wound down, she heard a countermelody in the walls, notes thinner than the box's song, played by some invisible, older instrument. That sound arranged itself opposite the lullaby, and when the room was full of both, she felt a presence align with the rhythm of her heartbeat, like two clocks agreeing to the same time. She discovered the attic hatch because the house wanted her to. The brass key slipped into an iron lock that did not resist, and the hatch gave up a breath of colder air, as if the attic had been holding its own silence like a held note. The stairs complained beneath her weight. At the top, the room was thin with old light. Crates had been stacked and labeled in her aunt's tidy hand, but toward the back, behind the crates, there was a small door painted the same ivory as the walls, sealed with a second tiny keyhole. Inside the little chamber, the air smelled of photochemicals and paper. The walls were lined with portraits, faces in stiff collars, smiles faded into feathery lines. Someone had scraped away the eyes of most photographs until only rings of glare remained, but one frame at the center was starkly blank, like a promise not yet fulfilled. When Mara touched the frame, the varnish beneath her fingers felt warm, as if someone had only recently held the space where an image must be. The tape recorder, once more in hand, offered rearranged logic. On playback, there were moments that contained her own voice, not recorded now, but stitched into the hiss like a memory folded into linens. "Don't leave it empty," the voice said, and it was her voice saying it with the small inflections she did when reminding herself to be practical. She realized then that something in the house had learned her cadence, her private tick of worry, and used it to speak in ways that made her recognize herself. One evening, as clouds made the pines into a black serrate, Mara dreamed of walking a hallway that lengthened with every step until doors multiplied along its sides. Behind one door, she heard the lullaby, thin and bright. She woke to find the hall outside her room had indeed been altered. A door she was certain had been a closet was now a proper doorway. The map on her legal pad had been joined by another line in ink she did not remember drawing, and the line pointed toward the door. At the threshold, the house felt like a living archive. She pushed into the doorway and found a room neither old nor new. Its dust was unsettled, as if someone had just left. Centered in the room on a narrow table was the music box, wound down to silence, and beside it a fresh photograph, not the faded type in the attic, but a glossy portrait of Mara from a life slightly advanced. A version of her, with a hairline softened by years she had not yet lived. Her breath left her like a small apology. The tape, the room, the photograph braided into a possibility she could not wish away. That the house kept expectations and offered them back as choices. Recording and replaying became a liturgy. Sometimes, the tape would offer only her own voice making plans she had yet to act on. Other times, it returned a sound like someone walking through paper. She began to understand the house's grammar, how it taught by repeating likelihoods until they felt inevitable. The feeling was less like entrapment than like an argument with a version of time that had other priorities. She thought of leaving, of throwing the key into the river and driving until the pines were a memory that bent in the rear window. But the town's roads at dusk had a way of narrowing, and the lights did not behave as she expected. Turns she had made 100 times rearranged themselves into loops that placed her back at the driveway. Her car keys went missing. The brass key to the attic vanished from her palm as casually as a coin falling through a sleeve. The house, it seemed, preferred that she stay to the point where her reasons to go would be the ones that slipped away. The last night came without spectacle. The music box had begun to play by itself in the small hours, a lullaby precise and slow. Mara stood on the porch. The pines closed above her like a ceiling, and listened. The song threaded through the town, and in it she could hear what she did not want to. Her own name spoken in the same soft cadence she used to read lists aloud. As the melody folded into the air, the blank frame in the attic looked less like an absence and more like an invitation. The house had been keeping her exactness, waiting until she could no longer tell if she was answering or being answered. She did not run. She walked into the pines instead, following the thin thread of the lullaby that now seemed to lead like a tow line through fog. The trees closed around her with the polite unhurriedness of things that are patient. Once or twice, the music slowed and rearranged itself into silence. Between the notes, Mara imagined she sensed a shape with the economy of a person and the indifference of weather. The last thing she thought she heard before the pines took the light was an echo of her own voice telling her, with careful calm, that it had been waiting